The morning was cold and grey when Danny Marsh stepped out of his farmhouse with a cup of coffee in one hand and a bucket of feed in the other. He had lived on this small Kentucky farm for all of his 43 years, first with his parents, then with his wife Clara until the cancer took her, and now alone with nothing but his chickens and his memories for company. The routine was simple and it kept him sane. Wake up before dawn, feed the animals, check the fences, work until his body was too tired to let his mind wander to dark places. But this morning something was wrong. His chickens were clustered at the far end of the yard, pressed against the fence like they were trying to escape from something. They should have been inside the coop at this hour, staying warm and waiting for their breakfast. Instead, they were out in the cold, making nervous sounds and refusing to go anywhere near the small wooden structure that Danny's father had built 30 years ago. Danny set down the bucket and walked back inside to grab his shotgun. Living alone in the country had taught him to be careful. Foxes came around sometimes and coyotes too. Once he had found a black bear rummaging through his garbage cans. Whatever had scared his chickens was probably just another animal looking for an easy meal. He would chase it off or shoot it, and that would be the end of the matter. He crossed the frost-covered grass with the gun held ready against his shoulder. The coop door was slightly open, which was strange because he always latched it shut at night. Danny used the barrel of the shotgun to push the door wider and stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light that filtered through the gaps in the wooden walls. At first he saw nothing, just straw and nesting boxes and the smell of chickens. Then something moved in the far corner. Danny raised the gun and pointed it at the shape huddled behind the nesting boxes. His finger found the trigger, and he was half a second away from firing when the shape moved again, and he saw what it really was. It was not a fox, it was not a coyote, it was not any animal he had ever seen in his life. The creature was roughly the size of a small woman, maybe 5 feet tall, with skin that was a pale purple, almost like lavender flowers. The skin seemed to shimmer slightly like it was catching light that was not there. The creature had 2 arms and 2 legs like a human, but the proportions were different, the limbs longer and thinner. The head was slightly larger than a human head, and the eyes were huge and dark, like pools of black water reflecting starlight. Those eyes looked at Danny with an intelligence that was impossible to deny. This was not an animal. This was a thinking, feeling being that understood exactly what was happening. Danny almost pulled the trigger anyway. His heart was pounding and his hands were shaking, and every instinct in his body was screaming at him that this thing was wrong, that it did not belong here, that he should destroy it before it could hurt him. Then he saw the bundle. The creature was holding something against its chest, wrapped in a silver cloth that seemed to be made of woven metal threads. The bundle was small, no bigger than a loaf of bread, and it was moving slightly. Danny heard a soft sound like a kitten mewing, and he realized what he was looking at. A baby. The creature was holding a baby. Danny lowered his gun. For a long moment neither of them moved. Danny stood there with the shotgun pointed at the ground, his breath making clouds in the cold air. The creature stayed huddled in the corner, its huge dark eyes never leaving his face. The baby made another small sound and the creature shifted its grip, holding the child closer, protecting it. Then something strange happened. Danny heard a voice inside his head. It was not a sound that came through his ears. It was more like a thought that was not his own, a presence that spoke directly into his mind. "Please, we only need shelter, just for a little while." The voice was soft and gentle, and filled with a desperation that Danny recognized. He had heard that same desperation in his own voice when Clara was dying, when he had the doctors to do something, anything, to save her. This creature, whatever it was terrified. It was alone and scared, and it had a child to protect, and it had nowhere else to go. Danny Marsh was not a complicated man. He did not know anything about aliens or space travel or the vast universe that existed beyond the sky. He was just a farmer who grew vegetables and raised chickens and tried to get through each day without falling apart. But he knew what it meant to be afraid. He knew what it meant to feel alone. And he knew that when someone was in trouble, you helped them if you could. He leaned his shotgun against the wall and held up his empty hands. "All right," he said out loud, not knowing if the creature could understand his words. "All right, you can stay." The creature's eyes changed somehow. The fear was still there, but now there was something else too, something that looked almost like hope. "Thank you," the voice in his head was trembling. "Thank you." Danny slowly and took a step back toward the door. "I am going to get you some blankets. It is too cold out here, and I will bring some food, though I do not know what you eat. Just stay here and keep quiet and I will figure out what to do." He left the coop and walked back toward the house on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. His mind was racing with questions he could not answer. What was that thing? Where had it come from? Why had it chosen his farm of all places? What was he supposed to do now? But underneath all the questions there was something else. a feeling he had not experienced in a very long time. For years, Danny had been going through the motions of living without actually being alive. He woke up, he worked, he ate, he slept, and he did it all again the next day. There was no purpose to any of it, no reason to keep going except that stopping seemed like too much effort. Now, for the first time since Clara died, Danny Marsh had something to do that mattered. There was a creature in his chicken coop that needed his help. There was a baby that needed to be kept safe. Whatever else happened, whatever madness was about to unfold, he was not going to turn his back on them. He gathered blankets from the closet and food from the kitchen and carried them across the yard to the coop. The creature was still there, still watching him with those huge dark eyes. Danny spread the blankets on the straw and set out the food and sat down on an overturned bucket to wait. "My name is Danny," he said. "I do not know if you can understand me, but that is my name, Danny Marsh." The voice came again, softer now, less afraid. "I am called Vera, and this is my daughter Lyra." Danny looked at the alien mother and her child, huddled together in his chicken coop on a cold Kentucky morning, and he smiled for the first time in years. "Nice to meet you, Vera. Welcome to Earth." The first few days were the hardest. Danny did not know what to feed an alien, so he tried everything he had. Bread, vegetables, fruit, eggs, milk, cheese. Vera could eat most of it, though she seemed to prefer things that were soft and mild. Lyra, the baby, drank a thick paste that Vera produced from a small container she had brought with her. It was part of her emergency supplies, she explained, and it would last another few weeks if she was careful. Danny moved them into the house after the second night. The coop was too cold and too cramped, and he could not bear the thought of that little baby shivering in the straw. He gave them the spare bedroom that had once belonged to his parents, the room where his mother had died of old age and his father had followed her 6 months later. It seemed fitting somehow that the room should have life in it again. Vera communicated through thoughts, projecting her words directly into Danny's mind. She called it linking, and she said it was how her people had always spoken to each other. Spoken language existed on her world too, but linking was more natural for them, more honest. You could not lie when you were speaking mind to mind. Danny asked her where she came from, and Vera told him everything. Her world was called Prime. It orbited a yellow star in a part of the galaxy that humans had not yet explored or even detected. Her people had lived there for thousands of generations. They were farmers and builders and artists. They grew food in great gardens that covered entire continents. They built cities of crystal and light that sang with the wind. They created music and poetry and paintings that celebrated the beauty of existence. They had no soldiers because they had no enemies. War was a concept they had read about in old books, but had never experienced themselves. Then the Dominion came. Vera's thoughts grew dark when she spoke of them. The Dominion was not a single species, but a collection of many, all of them united under one brutal philosophy. The strong had the right to take from the weak. The galaxy existed to be conquered, its resources extracted, its populations enslaved or destroyed. They moved from system to system in vast fleets of warships, and no one had ever successfully resisted them. They tried to negotiate. They offered to share their world, to provide food and art and knowledge in exchange for peace. The Dominion laughed at them. They did not want partners, they wanted subjects. When the invasion began, they had nothing to fight back with. Their ships were built for exploration and trade, not combat. Their tools were designed for creation, not destruction. They watched helplessly as the Dominion burned their cities and rounded up their people for processing. Millions died in the first wave alone. Some managed to escape. Vera's family had been among the lucky ones. Her parents had owned a small trading vessel, and they had used it to flee while the cities burned behind them. They joined a convoy of other refugee ships, thousands of running for their lives into the unknown darkness between stars. That was 12 Earth years ago. Vera had been young then, barely an adult by standards. She had watched her parents die of sickness on a cold asteroid where the convoy had stopped to repair their ships. She had found a mate among the other survivors and had lost him too when a Dominion patrol caught up with them and destroyed half the fleet. Lyra was all she had left, the last connection to everything she had once loved. Her ship had been damaged in the attack. The navigation systems failed and the engines were dying, and she had no idea where she was going. She drifted for weeks, rationing her supplies, trying to keep Lyra alive, waiting for the end to come. Then her sensors detected a small blue planet with a breathable atmosphere and liquid water and signs of primitive civilization. She had aimed for the most isolated area she could find and crashed in the woods behind Danny's farm. The ship was destroyed on impact. She had carried Lyra through the trees in the darkness, looking for any kind of shelter, and she had found the chicken coop. Danny listened to all of this without interrupting. When Vera finished, he sat in silence for a long time at the wall and trying to process what he had just learned. Aliens were real. There was life out there in the universe, intelligent life that built ships and traveled between stars. Some of that life was peaceful and kind, like Vera and her people. and some of it was evil, genuinely evil in a way that Danny had never encountered before. The Dominion sounded like something out of a nightmare, a force of pure destruction that existed only to consume and conquer. And now Vera was here on Earth, hiding in his farmhouse with her baby daughter, hoping that she had finally found a place where the Dominion could not reach her. Danny had one question that he was afraid to ask, but he knew he had to. Will they follow you here? Vera's thoughts were heavy with sorrow and fear. They follow all refugee trails eventually. It is what they do. They hunt down every survivor, every witness to their crimes. It may take years, perhaps many years, but yes, eventually they will find this planet, and when they do, they will do to your people what they did to mine. Danny felt something cold settle in his chest. He looked at Lyra sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware of the horror that had shaped her young life. He thought about the small town of Creek down the road, with its church and its general store and its people who had known him since he was a boy. He thought about all the other towns and cities across the world, billions of human beings going about their lives without any idea that something was coming for them. How long do we have? I do not know for certain. 5 years, 10 years, perhaps longer if we are fortunate, but the Dominion is patient, they will come. Danny stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over the Kentucky hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty he had taken for granted his whole life because he had never imagined it could be taken away. Then we have time, he said quietly, not much but some. Vera did not understand. Time for what? Danny turned back to face her. There was something in his eyes that had not been there before, a hardness that came from making a decision and knowing there was no going back. Time to get ready, time to prepare. Your people were farmers and artists and they did not know how to fight. But Vera, humans are different. We have been fighting each other since the beginning of our history. We have built weapons that can destroy entire cities in a single flash of light. We have survived wars that killed millions of our own kind. If these Dominion bastards want a fight, then by God, we will give them one. Vera stared at him with those huge dark eyes. She had met many species in her travels across the galaxy, but she had never met one quite like this. The response to violence had always been to flee, to hide, to hope the danger would pass. The idea of standing and fighting against the Dominion was so foreign to her that she could barely comprehend it. You would fight for us, for strangers from another world. Danny smiled, but there was no in it. You are not strangers anymore, Vera. You are under my roof, eating my food, sleeping in my house. That makes you family, and where I come from, we protect our family no matter what. He walked back to her and knelt down so they were at eye level. I am just one man on a farm in Kentucky. I cannot save the galaxy by myself, but I can start by keeping you and Lyra safe, and maybe, if we are lucky, we can convince the rest of humanity to help. For the first time since she had landed on this strange blue planet, Vera felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt hope. Danny knew he could not keep Vera and Lyra hidden forever. The farm was isolated, but it was not invisible. Neighbors came by sometimes to borrow tools or share gossip. The mail carrier drove up the long dirt road 3 times a week. Sooner or later someone would see something they were not supposed to see, and then the secret would be out. It happened sooner than he expected. 3 weeks after Vera's arrival, came by with a basket of eggs from her own hens, was 71 years old and had been Danny's neighbor for as long as he could remember. She had taught him in elementary school, had attended his wedding, had brought casseroles to his house every day for a month after Clara died. She was kind and nosy and impossible to avoid. Danny had told Vera to stay in the bedroom when anyone came to visit, but Lyra had been fussy that morning and Vera had taken her to the kitchen to warm some food. When walked up to the house and glanced through the window, she saw a purple-skinned alien standing at the stove with a baby in her arms. The scream was loud enough to send birds flying from the trees. Danny ran outside and found, backing away from the house, her basket of eggs scattered on the ground. Her face was white and her hands were shaking, and she was making small sounds that were not quite words. Wait, please, I can explain. What in the name of God was that thing? Her name is Vera. She is not going to hurt you. She is not going to hurt anyone. Just please calm down and let me explain. It took an hour of talking before stopped shaking. Danny sat her down in the living room and told her everything, from the morning he had found Vera in the chicken coop to the story of the Dominion and the threat they posed. Listened without interrupting, her eyes moving back and forth between Danny and the doorway where Vera stood holding Lyra. When Danny finished, was quiet for a long time. Then she stood up and walked over to Vera and looked at her for a moment. You poor dear, she said finally. You look half-starved. I am going to make some soup. That was how became the second human being to learn about the aliens living on Danny Marsh's farm. She did not call the police. She did not run screaming into town. She made soup and fussed over Lyra and asked Vera 100 questions about her home world and her people and her journey across the stars. By the end of the evening, she had declared herself Lyra's honorary grandmother and had promised to bring fresh vegetables from her garden the next morning. Word spread slowly after that, told her sister who told her husband who mentioned it to his brother after a few too many beers at the local bar. Within a month, most of Creek knew that something strange was happening at Danny Marsh's farm. Some people were curious, some were frightened. A few were angry, convinced that Danny had lost his mind or worse. The town meeting was held in the basement of the Methodist Church on a cold Tuesday night in November. Nearly everyone in Creek showed up, packing the small space until there was standing room only. Danny stood at the front with Vera beside him, feeling the weight of all those eyes pressing down on them. He had expected hostility. He had prepared himself for shouting and accusations and demands that the alien be handed over to the government. What he got instead surprised him. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," said Gregory, a 90-year-old veteran who had fought in Korea and Vietnam and had never been impressed by anything in his life. He was leaning on a cane and squinting at Vera with sharp, intelligent eyes. "This lady came here running from something called the Dominion. They are basically space Nazis who go around conquering planets and killing everyone who gets in their way. And they are eventually going to find Earth and try to do the same thing to us." "Danny, that is correct, sir." Gregory was silent for a moment. Then he turned to look at the crowd behind him. "Well, I do not know about the rest of you, but I did not spend 3 years freezing my backside off in Korea just to roll over for a bunch of alien bullies. If these Dominion folks want a fight, I say we give them one." There was a murmur in the crowd, some heads, others looked uncertain. "But Gregory," said Martha, who ran the general store, "what can we do? We are just a small town in Kentucky. We do not have armies or spaceships or any of the things we would need to fight an alien invasion." "No, we do not," Gregory agreed. "But the United States government does, and the Chinese have armies, and the Russians, and every other nation on this planet. What we need to do is get this information to the people who can actually do something about it." "And what if they take Vera away?" Danny asked. "What if they lock her up in some laboratory and experiment on her like she is a specimen?" Gregory looked at Vera, then back at Danny. "Son, I have been dealing with government idiots my whole life. Most of them are fools, but they are not all bad. And even the foolish ones know the difference between an enemy and a friend. This woman is not our enemy. She is a refugee who came here asking for help. Any government worth its salt will figure that out eventually." He turned to address the whole room. "I am not saying it will be easy. There will be fear and panic and probably some very stupid decisions made by people in power, but we have a choice here. We can hide this secret and hope the Dominion never finds us, which according to Vera is not going to work, or we can take this information public and start for what is coming. I know which option I prefer." The vote was not unanimous. Some people wanted to keep quiet, to pretend none of this was happening and hope for the best. But the majority sided with Gregory. They would contact the government, they would share what they knew, and they would do everything in their power to protect Vera and Lyra while they did it. The next few months were chaos. Reporters descended on Creek like locusts. Government agents arrived in black SUVs and set up checkpoints on every road. Scientists came with equipment Danny could not even begin to understand, scanning Vera and Lyra and the wreckage of her ship that was still scattered in the woods. Through it all, the people of Creek stood firm. When federal agents tried to take Vera away for protective custody, Gregory organized a human chain around Danny's farmhouse and told the agents they would have to go through him first. When a group of protesters from out of state showed up with signs calling for the aliens to be, met them on the road and informed them that they were not welcome in her town. It was messy and frightening and often ugly, but slowly, gradually, the tide began to turn. General Price was the military officer assigned to handle the situation. She was a tall woman with gray hair and cold blue eyes, and she had a reputation for being ruthless and efficient. Danny expected her to treat Vera as a threat to be contained. Instead, she treated her as a source of intelligence to be protected. "I have read your reports," General Price told Vera during their first meeting. "I have seen the data you provided about Dominion technology and tactics, and I have to be honest with you. If everything you have told us is true, then humanity is facing an existential threat the likes of which we have never encountered before." "Vera, it is true, all of it." "Then we have work to do." General Price stood up and looked out the window at the Kentucky countryside. "I am not going to pretend this will be easy. Convincing the world's governments to work together is going to be like herding cats, but we do not have a choice. If we want to survive what is coming, we need to start now." She turned back to Vera. "You came here looking for shelter. What you found instead was an ally. I hope that will be enough." Vera looked at Danny, who had been standing quietly in the corner throughout the meeting. He gave her a small nod of encouragement. "I hope so too," she replied, "for all our sakes." The world did not take the news well at first. When Vera addressed the United Nations via video link, her translated words broadcast to every nation on Earth, the reactions ranged from disbelief to outright panic. Stock markets crashed, governments fell, religious leaders declared that the end times had arrived. For several months it seemed like humanity might tear itself apart before the Dominion ever had a chance to attack. But humans had survived worse than fear. They had survived plagues and wars and disasters that should have ended civilization, and slowly, painfully, they began to pull themselves together. The first step was accepting that the threat was real. Vera provided everything she knew about the Dominion, from their ship designs and weapon systems to their tactics and command structure. Scientists analyzed the wreckage of her vessel and confirmed that the technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever developed. The evidence was undeniable. Something was out there and it was coming. The second step was out what to do about it. Danny Marsh found himself in meetings he never would have imagined attending. He sat in conference rooms in Washington and Geneva and Beijing, listening to generals and scientists and politicians debate strategies and allocate resources. He was not a soldier or a diplomat or an expert in anything useful, but he was the man who had first given shelter to Vera, and that gave him a kind of moral authority that no one else possessed. When Danny spoke, people listened. Vera was even more important. She became the bridge between humanity and the vast store of knowledge that they had accumulated over thousands of years. They had no weapons, but they had science and technology that humans could barely comprehend. Their understanding of physics, of energy, of the fundamental forces that govern the universe was centuries ahead of anything on Earth. With Vera's help, human scientists began to make breakthroughs that would have taken decades under normal circumstances. The first new warships were built in secret facilities on the dark side of the moon. They were crewed by galactic standards, cobbled together from human engineering and principles, but they were a start. Each ship was armed with weapons that combined human destructive ingenuity with energy technology. Each ship was more than anything humanity had ever launched into space. The construction effort required cooperation on a scale that had never existed before. Old enemies set aside their differences and shared resources and knowledge. American engineers worked alongside Chinese scientists. Russian pilots trained with European crews. Nations that had been on the brink of war suddenly found themselves building ships together in orbital shipyards that could be seen glinting in the night sky. Not everyone supported the effort. There were those who believed that humanity should try to negotiate with the Dominion to offer submission in exchange for survival. There were those who thought the whole thing was a hoax, an elaborate trick designed to consolidate power in the hands of a global government. Protests erupted in cities around the world, and more than once the whole project came close to falling apart. But the majority held firm. They had seen the evidence, they had heard Vera's testimony, and they understood that there was no negotiating with an enemy that saw them as nothing more than resources to be exploited. Danny watched the transformation with a mixture of pride and terror. Pride because his species was rising to meet a challenge that would have crushed most civilizations. Terror because he knew what was coming and he was not sure it would be enough. Vera shared his fears. She had seen the Dominion in action. She knew how powerful they were, how ruthless, how utterly without mercy. There had been a peaceful people with millennia of accumulated wisdom, and they had been swept aside like insects. What chance did humanity really have? But there was something about these humans that Vera had not expected, something that gave her hope despite everything she knew. They did not give up. Other species she had encountered in her travels had reacted to the Dominion threat in different ways. Some had surrendered immediately, hoping that cooperation would spare them the worst. Others had fled, scattering across the galaxy in desperate search of safety. A few had tried to fight, but their resistance had been brief and futile. Humans were different. When they learned about the threat, they did not surrender and they did not run. They got angry. They rolled up their sleeves and went to work. They argued and fought among themselves, yes, but underneath all the conflict there was a core of stubborn determination that would not bend. Vera remembered something Danny had told her during those first days in the farmhouse. "Where I come from, we protect our family no matter what." She had not fully understood what he meant at the time. The concept of family was narrower, more focused on blood relations and direct bonds, but humans seemed to expand their definition of family to include anyone they cared about. Danny had made Vera and Lyra his family within days of meeting them, and now somehow humanity was making the entire planet into a family that would stand together against the darkness. The years passed. Lyra grew from a baby into a child, then into a young girl who spoke both English and who loved to run through the fields around Danny's farmhouse, doted on her like a grandmother and taught her to bake cookies and read picture books. Gregory, who had been promoted to admiral and put in charge of the entire Earth fleet, visited whenever he could and told her stories about the old wars he had fought in. Danny grew older too. His hair turned grey and his joints started to ache in the mornings, but he never stopped working, never stopped advocating for the preparation effort, never stopped believing that humanity could survive what was coming. When the 8th year arrived, the fleet was ready. 300 warships, each one crewed by the best pilots and soldiers and engineers that humanity could produce. They were stationed throughout the solar system, hidden in asteroid fields and behind moons, waiting for the enemy to arrive. The warning came on a Tuesday morning. Long-range sensors detected a disturbance at the edge of the solar system. Something was emerging from hyperspace, something big. The readings showed 47 contacts, each one larger than any ship humanity had ever built. The Dominion had found them. Admiral Gregory, now 98 years old and still too stubborn to die, was on the bridge of the fleet flagship when the alert came through. He had been waiting for this moment for 8 years. He had known it was coming, had prepared for it every day of his life since that town meeting in the church basement. He activated the fleet-wide communication channel and spoke in a voice that was old but still strong. "All ships, this is Admiral, the enemy has arrived. I know you are scared, I am scared too, but we have trained for this, we have built for this, we have sacrificed everything for this moment. Now it is time to show these bastards what humanity is made of. All ships move to intercept positions. Today we fight for our world, today we fight for our future, and today, by God, we are going to win." Across the solar system, 300 ships powered up their engines and moved to face the enemy. The battle for Earth had begun. The Dominion fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of metal locusts descending on a field of grain. 47 warships, each one bristling with weapons and carrying thousands of soldiers bred for conquest. They had done this 1,000 times before on 1,000 different worlds. The pattern was always the same. Arrive, demand surrender, crush any resistance, harvest the resources, enslave the population. It was efficient and brutal, and it had never failed. The commander of the Dominion fleet was a creature called. He was old by the standards of his species, scarred from decades of campaigns and utterly confident in his superiority. He had conquered 17 planets personally and had overseen the subjugation of dozens more. This small blue world with its primitive inhabitants would be no different. He broadcast the standard ultimatum on all frequencies, his words translated into every human language by the fleet's communication systems. "People of this planet, you have been selected for processing by the Dominion. You will surrender immediately and submit to our authority. Any resistance will be met with total annihilation. You have 1 hour to respond." Expected fear, he expected panic. He expected the desperate pleading that always came when lesser species realized what they were facing. What he received instead was a transmission from a human ship, a vessel that was laughably small compared to his own warships, but which had positioned itself directly in his path. "This is Admiral Gregory of the Earth Fleet to Dominion Command. We have received your message and have prepared our response." Felt something he had not experienced in decades, curiosity. These creatures were actually going to respond. "Your kind has burned its way across the galaxy," the human voice continued. "You have destroyed civilizations, enslaved billions, and believed yourselves invincible. But you made a mistake. You chased your refugees to our world. You gave us time to prepare, and you underestimated what humans will do to protect those we have taken into our care." On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Danny Marsh was beside him, serving as a civilian liaison despite his age and complete lack of military training. Vera was there too, her thoughts linked with the communication systems to provide real-time intelligence about Dominion tactics. "We are not going to surrender," Admiral continued. "We are not going to negotiate, and we are not going to run. You wanted to meet humanity. Well, here we are." He cut the transmission and turned to his crew. "All ships engage." The battle that followed would be remembered for as long as humans existed. It was brutal and chaotic, and nothing like the simulations they had practiced. Dominion weapons tore through human ships like paper. Human weapons struggled to penetrate Dominion shields. For the first 2 hours, it seemed like the entire effort had been for nothing. But humans had something the Dominion had never encountered before. They had adaptability. When one tactic failed, they tried another. When a squadron was destroyed, the survivors regrouped and attacked from a different angle. When a captain realized his weapons could not penetrate enemy shields, he rammed his ship directly into the Dominion vessel and detonated his reactor core, taking both ships out in a blinding flash of light. Watch the battle unfold with growing disbelief. He had fought 100 species across the galaxy, and not one of them had ever resisted like this. These humans were outnumbered and they knew they were going to lose, but they kept fighting anyway. They threw themselves against his fleet with a ferocity that bordered on insanity. And slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. The technology that Vera had provided was making a difference. Human ships were, and more than the Dominion had expected. Human weapons, though weaker, could be fired more rapidly and more accurately. And human crews, unlike the Dominion soldiers who relied on overwhelming force, were trained to think creatively and adapt to changing circumstances. By the 8th hour had lost 12 ships. By the 10th hour he had lost 20. By the 12th hour his fleet was in disarray and his own flagship had taken critical damage. He ordered a retreat, something no Dominion commander had ever done in the history of their conquest. But before his remaining ships could enter hyperspace, a human voice came over the communication channel. Dominion commander, this is Admiral, your fleet is broken, your ships are burning. You came here expecting an easy victory and instead you found something you never anticipated. You found a species that does not know when to quit. There was a pause. When the Admiral spoke again, his voice was hard as iron. Go back to wherever you came from. Tell your masters what happened here. Tell them that Earth is not a world to be conquered. Tell them that if they ever come back we will be waiting, and tell them this. For every world you have burned, for every species you have enslaved, for every crime you have committed across the stars, humanity is coming for you, not today, not tomorrow. And when that day arrives, you will learn what it means to fear. The remaining Dominion ships fled into hyperspace, leaving behind the wreckage of their failed invasion. The battle was over, humanity had won. On the observation deck of the Defiance, Vera stood looking out at the debris field that had once been the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. Tears were streaming down her face, something Danny had never seen before. We ran from them for so long, she said through their mental link. We thought there was no hope. We thought the Dominion could never be stopped. Danny put his arm around her shoulder. He was exhausted and grief-stricken and still processing the enormity of what had just happened. Nearly half the fleet had been destroyed. Thousands of humans had died. The cost of victory had been almost unbearably high. But they had won. Against all odds, against an enemy that had never been defeated, they had won. You just needed to find the right allies, Danny said quietly. Below them, Earth hung in the void, blue and green and impossibly beautiful. Lyra was down there somewhere, watching the battle from S's farmhouse, probably clutching the old woman's hand and praying for her mother's safe return. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the survivors of 100 conquered worlds were receiving the news. The Dominion was not invincible. Someone had finally stood against them. Someone had finally won. The message spread like wildfire through refugee camps and hidden bases and scattered fleets that had been running for generations. Hope, that most dangerous of emotions, began to stir in hearts that had known only despair. On Earth, the celebrations lasted for days. Humans danced in the streets and wept with relief, and strangers who had suddenly become family. They had faced the apocalypse and they had survived. They had proven that even the smallest species could stand against the darkness if they were brave enough and stubborn enough and united enough to try. Admiral gave one final address to the people of Earth before retiring to his home in Kentucky, where he planned to spend his remaining years playing chess with and watching Lyra grow up. We won today, he said, his old voice carrying across the planet through every screen and speaker. But this is not the end. The Dominion is still out there. They will regroup, they will rebuild, and they will come back. When that day arrives, we need to be ready. We need to be stronger, and we need to remember what we learned in this battle. We are not alone in this universe. There are others out there who need our help, just like Vera and Lyra needed our help 8 years ago. We can choose to turn our backs on them, or we can choose to stand with them. I know which choice I prefer. He paused and looked directly into the camera. Humanity has entered the galactic stage. We did not ask for this, we did not want it. But it is ours now, and we are going to make the most of it. To any species out there watching this broadcast, any survivors of Dominion conquest, any refugees hiding in the darkness, I want you to know something. You are not alone anymore. Earth is here, and we will never stop fighting until every last one of you is free. The broadcast ended, but the echo of those words traveled across the stars, carried by radio waves and hope, and the stubborn determination of a species that had learned to fight by fighting each other, and had chosen to use that terrible skill in of those who could not defend themselves. Danny Marsh returned to his farmhouse in Kentucky after the celebration. Vera and Lyra were waiting for him on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Was inside making soup, just like she had on that first day when she had discovered the aliens living in her neighbor's home. What happens now? Lyra asked. She was 8 years old and full of questions about everything. Danny sat down on the porch steps and looked out at the land his father had farmed and his father before him. Now we rest for a little while, he said, and then we get back to work. There are a lot of people out there who need help, and we promised we would give it to them. Vera sat down beside him and took his hand. After all these years, she still marveled at the warmth of human contact, at the way these strange, stubborn beings expressed care and connection through simple touch. Thank you, she said through their link, for everything. Danny smiled and squeezed her hand. You are family, Vera, and where I come from, we protect our family no matter what. Above them, the stars were coming out one by one, glittering against the darkening sky. Somewhere among those stars, the survivors of 100 worlds were looking toward Earth with hope in their hearts. The galaxy would never be the same. And it had all started with a farmer in Kentucky who found an alien mother hiding in his chicken coop and chose not to turn her away.